From the windswept shores of Maine to the fisherman's paradise of Key West, Florida, from Alaska's wilderness to the beach resorts of Hawaii, there are now more than 250 million of us who are lucky enough to call ourselves Americans. Our roots can be traced to every corner of the world. Our backgrounds, our beliefs, our experiences encompass all that this old globe we call Earth has to offer. The stories we tell sometimes come from ancient forefathers and sometimes from a neighbor or someone we work with. Some of the people and some of the stories sound more believable than others. When it comes to ghost stories, we all have a favorite. We know there's no such thing as a ghost. Maybe someone just imagined something, or exaggerated something, or heard something, or saw something. That must be it. Even these stories I'm about to tell you, sure, they're all well documented, the facts are true, but still, 95% of all the ghost stories are, well, who knows just what they are. But remember, what I am about to tell you actually happened. What if you found out that you owned a haunted house? Well, you do. It is the most famous house in the whole nation. It's called the White House. If you are an American taxpayer, you own the building and the furniture, and you even own the ghost that haunts the hallways and at least one of the rooms. This is a famous ghost. You probably have his picture in your pocket right now. Do you have a penny or a $5 bill? There's Abe Lincoln. But don't worry, he hasn't been seen anywhere recently, except in the White House. The first person to see Abe Lincoln lying dead in the White House was Abe Lincoln himself. 3 times in dreams, Lincoln saw his friends and family members walking slowly and sadly past his coffin with tears in their eyes. Each time he dreamed of his death, it was on the eve of a great Civil War battle. Then, after the war had ended, he had the dream again. On the night of April 13th, 1865, Abe Lincoln saw his corpse looking up out of the casket as prominent senators and cabinet officials paid their last respects. He even told some senators the following day, Good Friday, April 14th, 1865, that he had again had that dream, even though the Civil War had ended. That evening, Lincoln and his wife would attend a play called Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. Abe Lincoln would be shot that night, and he would die the following morning. But that is only the beginning of this story. As the funeral procession passed Ford's Theater, a large cornerstone fell from the top of the building. The crowd that lined the streets gasped, but no one was injured. It just seemed to be the building's way of saluting a fallen friend. The 16th president was laid to rest in his grave, but the story continues. The first person who admitted seeing Abraham Lincoln at the White House after his death was First Lady Grace Coolidge. She saw him staring out the oval window above the main entrance. He looked sad. He had often looked out that same window after receiving bad news from the war front. It was a brave thing for Grace Coolidge to admit seeing Lincoln's ghost. The only time in previous history when a First Lady spoke about seeing spirits, she was considered to be insane, and she eventually went to an asylum. That First Lady was Mrs. Abraham Lincoln. Now, listen to this. In 1945, Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands came to the White House to visit President Franklin Roosevelt. She slept in the Lincoln bedroom. Shortly past midnight, there was a knock at the door. The Queen made her way to the door and she opened it. There she saw Abraham Lincoln standing in the hall. He said nothing. Eleanor Roosevelt said she sometimes felt his presence when she studied or wrote in the Lincoln bedroom. She never saw him enter, but she would feel a chill when she knew someone was standing behind her in the room near the door. She would turn around and sometimes see a fleeing apparition. Lincoln's bedroom also has a chill that is felt by many of the visitors, even on hot summer nights. Is it possible that Lincoln's spirit has some unfinished presidential task? Carl Sandburg was the author who wrote Lincoln's biography. He probably studied Lincoln more than any other historian. When Carl Sandburg asked President Roosevelt which room in the White House was Lincoln's study, where did Lincoln sign the Emancipation Proclamation, where did Lincoln spend his time at the White House, Roosevelt said, "Carl, if you want to know where Lincoln spent his time, just walk around. You will know." Carl Sandburg began to walk through the halls and the rooms, and he felt a little of Lincoln's presence here, a little there. But when he came to Lincoln's bedroom, where Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation, Carl Sandburg froze in his tracks. He began to weep as he understood the pressure and the sadness Lincoln had felt in the White House, where one of Lincoln's sons had died, where his wife first showed signs of madness. Carl Sandburg sat down, closed his eyes, and stayed in the room until it was dark. He then left, knowing he had shared a few quiet hours with Mr. Lincoln. During the Reagan administration, the president's daughter Maureen and her husband spent the night in Lincoln's bedroom. Both of them saw President Lincoln standing near the window. When they awoke, he was surrounded by a red glow. The spirit of Abe Lincoln made its most dramatic appearance, not to a president, not to a first lady, not to a queen, not to a family member, but to an ordinary, hard-working person, a White House maid. The maid often cleaned the Lincoln bedroom, and occasionally the door would creak shut or slam shut. She thought it must be the wind, even though she felt no breeze. One day, she ran into the study where Mrs. Roosevelt was having a meeting with a charitable group. She apologized for the interruption and then whispered something into Eleanor's ear. The only thing the group heard was, "He's up there now." Both ladies left the group without an explanation. When Eleanor returned a short while later, she felt she should explain. "It's just our ghost. The maid was cleaning the Lincoln bedroom when she turned around and saw Mr. Lincoln sitting on the bed, taking off his shoes. It must be his nap time. When asked if she saw Mr. Lincoln, Mrs. Roosevelt said, "I thought it would be better not to look in. I know he's there, and I know a president needs his rest." Abe Lincoln was not the first Lincoln whose ghost was seen at the White House. His son Willie, who died in the White House while Abe Lincoln was president, was seen by some of the White House staff during President U.S. Grant's term of office. All this talk of dead presidents and ghosts in the White House is very, very sad. Let's cheer things up a little. I call this the story of the 3 mummies. Many of us have heard the story of Tutankhamun. He was once the teenage boy ruler of ancient Egypt. He was the son-in-law of the pharaoh Akhenaten, one of the most remarkable of all the leaders of ancient Cairo. Tutankhamun was by all accounts a charismatic young leader, and all Egypt mourned his death at the age of 18 in the middle of the 14th century BC. Tutankhamun was married at the age of 12 to Akhenaten's eldest daughter. 6 years later, he would be dead. 33 centuries later, he would again show signs of life. Akhenaten had a violent family disagreement with one of his daughters. The pharaoh ordered her death, and after she had been killed, one of her hands was severed and buried in a secret place. The reason for this was to deny access to eternity to his wayward daughter. It was believed only those whose bodies remained intact could have eternal life. In the 1890s, a science apprentice who called himself Count Louis Hamann was living in Luxor. He met a sheikh who was dying of malaria. Count Hamann was able to cure the sheikh. The sheikh gave the count his most precious gift. It turned out to be the mummified hand of an ancient Egyptian princess. The gift fascinated the count. He was aware of the powers that passed through the centuries from ancient rituals and curses. He also knew wealth beyond imagination could await the person who helped an ancient priestess achieve her paradise. Haman kept the hand as he traveled about seeking more information. In 1922, Haman and his wife were living in England, and they noticed something very strange was happening to the mummified hand. The skin began to soften, and the complexion began to look normal and healthy, and blood was filling the veins in the back of the hand. Haman decided to burn the hand on Halloween of 1922. As he threw the hand into the fire on Halloween evening, a vision appeared at the door. Wearing the robes and the jewelry of an Egyptian princess, there stood the daughter of Akhenaten. Her hand was missing. She jumped into the fire and disappeared. When Haman looked into the fire, the hand was gone. The princess had been reunited with her missing appendage. This could have been enough to convince most of the doubtful that there was a power that slept for centuries, but which could come back to life like a dormant volcano. But this is where the story gets strange. Only 4 days later, on November 4th, 1922, the tomb of Tutankhamun was uncovered. Tutankhamun, you will remember, was the brother-in-law of the fiery princess. The archaeological team which made the discovery consisted of Howard Carter, a well-known Egyptologist who oversaw the digging, and Lord Carnarvon, who paid the bill for the expedition. It was, in fact, Lord Carnarvon who entered the tomb of Tutankhamun and was the first person to see the fantastic wealth. Howard Carter and others followed him, but it was Lord Carnarvon who violated the sanctity of the tomb. Count Aman heard of the discovery and wrote to Lord Carnarvon, warning him of the ancient curse. The Count told what happened to the centuries-old withered hand that came back to life and reunited with its body. Lord Carnarvon ignored the warning and took the wealth from Tutankhamun's burial site. During the excavation, Lord Carnarvon was bitten by a mosquito, and after several months of agony, he died from a mysterious bite on April 5th, 1923. His brother then committed suicide, and a few months later, his stepmother died from a mysterious insect bite. That might seem like a powerful curse, but friends, there's a more frightening Egyptian mummy story that involves a mummified princess of Amun-Ra. She lived about 1600 BC. She was a well-preserved mummy when she was purchased by Douglas Murray while he was visiting Egypt. Although he had heard of the curse and was warned never to remove the mummy from Egypt, Murray had his acquisition crated up and sent to London, where it would eventually be given to the British Museum. Douglas Murray stayed behind in Egypt while the crate was on its way to Great Britain. He journeyed down the Nile on a hunting expedition. The gun he carried mysteriously discharged and struck Murray, leaving him in agony. The boat was hastily turned around to return to Cairo for medical attention. There suddenly was a strong wind blowing against them where calm waters had been minutes before. It took 10 days to reach Cairo, and by that time gangrene had set in and Murray's arm was amputated. 2 of his companions died on the cruise back to England, and they were buried at sea. 2 Egyptian servants who helped load the mummy crate died within a year. All of the Egyptian art treasures that Murray bought disappeared during the voyage to London. When Murray opened the mummy's crate in London to examine how well it held up during the ocean voyage, he was astonished that it appeared to be in better shape than when he had first seen it. While he was looking at the mummy's face, the mummy's eyes opened and turned to look at him. He immediately knew it was alive and he would suffer the curse if he kept it. He generously gave the mummy to a lady who had had an interest in Egyptian archaeology. The lady lost her fiancé, then her mother fell, breaking her leg, and although she should have quickly recovered, the mother died after 6 months of suffering. The lady's pets then died, and she became ill, and it was obvious she was dying. She called her barrister to make out a will, and her attorney told her to get rid of the mummy immediately. The mummy was then presented to the British Museum, and the lady's health returned to normal. A museum photographer took pictures of the mummy, but the pictures could not be used because the eyes were blurred as if they had been moving rapidly while the picture taking was in progress. The photographer died a few weeks later. An Egyptologist was then put in charge of preparing a display for the mummy. He died. The museum found itself denying reports of the curse on their new, as yet unseen display. The museum placed the mummy in the basement. And that's where the story really gets weird. The British Museum decided to give the mummy away to the New York Museum. They had it loaded onto a ship to be sent to the United States. That ship was the Titanic. The Titanic went down in 1912 with a loss of 1,500 people and one mummy. There are plans to salvage what was on board. Isn't that a great story for Halloween or Mummy's Day? Even though we are impressed by the stories of presidents and princesses and pharaohs, we probably are more likely to understand and feel the chill that goes up our spine when a ghostly event happens to a friend or to a family member or to you or to me. I knew a young married couple who lived in Henderson, Nevada in the late 1960s. At that time, they had 2 young children. Their son was about 3, and their daughter was just a baby. They had recently moved into a house that gave them enough room for their growing family. There was even a room that was a perfect nursery for the baby. Things went well for them, although they would occasionally hear the baby crying in the nursery. It apparently wasn't anything to be concerned about. When the parents would rush to the crib to see why she was crying, the baby would be sound asleep. This happened many times. The baby would cry, Mom would come running, and there the baby was sleeping peacefully. The father had the same experience many times, and he even mentioned it to me one day. It seemed to be just one of those things that babies do. One day my friends heard a knock at the door. They opened the door, and there stood the people who used to live in the house. They were driving through the neighborhood, and they thought they would stop to see their old home. They were invited inside, and they had a nice conversation, and my friends then began showing the visitors some of the changes they had made in the old house. There was the new paint, the cabinets, the carpets. From room to room, they pointed out various improvements. They saved the nursery for last. They were proud of the room that seemed just right for a baby. As they walked toward the room, the lady who was visiting said, "No, I can't go into that room." It seemed a strange thing to say. She was asked, "Why not?" She spoke slowly. "That's the room where my baby died." Is it possible that the baby who cried was a ghost? Perhaps just a baby ghost who wanted to be sure that someone would come if they heard a baby crying. My aunt died during the 1980s. She had had a long, happy life and a big family. Her son, who was my cousin, was getting ready to go to her funeral. My cousin was always running a few minutes late, and he was always forgetting or losing something. His wife had got everything ready for him, his suit, his shirt and tie. He was almost ready to leave when he noticed his watch on the dresser. It was the watch his mother had bought for him when he was much younger. He had lost it many years before. There it was, nicely cleaned and polished and running perfectly. His wife had even wound it and set it. He and his family left for the funeral. After the services, he thanked his wife for locating the watch. She said she knew nothing about the watch. She had not found it. She didn't put it on the dresser. She didn't wind it or set it. My cousin asked other members of his family if they had found the watch. No one had any idea where the watch came from. My cousin realized it was his mom who put the watch on the dresser. It was just his mom's way of making sure he wouldn't be late for her funeral. Late in the 1950s, I lived in a hotel in downtown Los Angeles. It was on Spring Street. The warehouse where I worked was about 1.5 miles east of downtown, near the Alameda district. I walked to work and back every day. On the way home each evening, I would stop to eat at a restaurant. I liked to walk a different route every day. Sometimes I would walk 2 or 3 miles out of my way just to see a different part of what was in those days a beautiful city. Downtown Los Angeles had marvelous old buildings with ornate designs and gargoyles. Most of the skyscrapers in those days were exactly 13 stories tall. It was a law to keep buildings safe in case of an earthquake. Don't exceed 13 stories. As I walked in different areas, looking at different buildings, I also ate at a different restaurant almost every night. The restaurants in those days were not fast food specialty shops. They were restaurants with personality and individual recipes. Potatoes were not always French fries. One night, when I was walking home, I wandered a different path and found myself in an area that I had never before seen. Quaint old buildings and storefronts, and there was a restaurant. I walked in, and as I entered the front door, I saw a lady wearing an apron who was walking forward from the back door that led to the kitchen. I sat down at the attractive counter, and I noticed there were no menus, and the lady was carrying 2 plates of food. She set the food down in front of me, and then she reached into a cold storage area and got a bottle of milk and poured me a glass of cold milk. I had hoped for a menu because I wanted to order some beef stew. I had a craving that day for the beef stew my mom used to make with biscuits. However, there was no need for a menu because there in front of me was a big dish of beef stew and a plate of biscuits. Lucky me. When I finished, I asked, "How much?" $1, she said, the only words she had spoken. The next night, I had a hunger for fried chicken like my mom used to make. I remembered the fried potatoes, the coleslaw, and I also had a yen for banana cream pie. I found myself walking in the front door, and again, here came the lady with the food. Fried chicken, of course, with coleslaw, fried potatoes. She poured me a glass of milk, and she said nothing. I noticed there was no one else in the restaurant again. No employees, no customers. Well, the word would get around. I asked how much, thinking there might be a higher price for the bigger meal. After all, I'd had a salad and a piece of banana cream pie. $1. That's what she said again. Each evening that week, I would find my way to the restaurant. I never actually noticed what street it was on. I just went by landmarks, past this drugstore, turned right at this vegetable stand, looked for an awning, past the old apartment house where the children played on the porch. Each time I walked into the restaurant, the apron lady came forward from the kitchen carrying whatever food I happened to want. I never ordered anything, and all the lady ever said was $1. There was never anyone else in the restaurant. I was in the Army Reserves then, and one night, instead of going to the restaurant, I went directly to my hotel room so I could change into my uniform and go to the meeting. The next night, I looked for the restaurant. Nothing looked familiar. I should have noticed the street. I looked for the restaurant every night for about a month. It finally sunk in. I had been eating at a ghost cafe. The lady probably owned a restaurant in that building years before, and somehow she came back to do what she did best: serve the finest $1 meal in Los Angeles. If you're ever in downtown Los Angeles, you want to eat at the Ghost Cafe, I can tell you it's in a building somewhere between Temple and 6th Street and between Broadway and Los Angeles Street. But don't go there unless you crave something special, and make sure you have $1. How do you know if a ghost is trying to contact you? Well, you may notice something unusual. A rapping sound, a cold chill in a certain room, lights that go on and off. Ghosts use electronics, and they've been known to use radio or television, or to show up in still photos. Sometimes you can see them, you can hear them and touch them, and other times they may be transparent or just a blur or a spot of light. Sometimes they use the telephone. Keep your eyes and ears open, and if you feel a tap on your shoulder, or if someone takes control of your car or your tape recorder, just be prepared to meet a nice ghost. Most ghost stories are nice. Most ghosts seem to be helpful. Don't be afraid yet. If you remember nothing else you hear today, remember this: never, never pick up a hitchhiker near a cemetery. Those who thumb rides from the graveyard might be heading toward a dead end. For example, near Andersonville, Georgia, 1 mile south of Route 228 West, is Andersonville National Cemetery. A Civil War soldier in military attire of the mid-1800s tries to get a ride to summon aid for his regiment. If a car stops to pick him up, he disappears. In Chicago, the story is often told of a young girl named Mary who hitchhikes on city streets asking gentlemen to take her dancing. She wears a fancy, though out-of-style party dress and patent leather shoes. After she's gone dancing, she asks to be driven to her place on Archer Avenue. She jumps from the car and disappears on Archer Avenue at Graceland Cemetery. A graveyard in Fayette County, Alabama, has an unusual ghostly image. At Musgrove Cemetery is the grave of Robert Musgrove, a former railroad engineer. His girlfriend Maud went to his funeral after he was killed in a train wreck. She promised she would never leave him. She kept her promise. After she died in 1962, her silhouette appeared on the gravestone of Robert Musgrove. The silhouette was identified by those who had seen her kneeling at Robert's graveside when she was alive. It was Maud. The kneeling silhouette was washed away. Then it was washed away again, and it was washed away again. Then it was sandblasted away from the stone. Twice. If you want to see the silhouette, stop by. It's still there. North of Birmingham, turn on Route 43 to Musgrove Cemetery. Remember, you can't wash a ghost away. Remember, you can't sandblast a ghost away. And remember, never, never pick up a hitchhiker near a cemetery. George Patton listened to ghosts early in his life. His departed ancestors guided him and instructed him on how to live up to their standards set in more Puritan times. Not just his living family members, but the ghosts that he spoke to and talked openly about were sealing his spirit and his fate to become the best soldier of all time. He communicated with Napoleon, Hannibal, and even Julius Caesar. He was aware that he could never be harmed in a battle, but he also knew he could not live beyond the war. He was here to single-handedly, if necessary, win World War II by the quickest possible means. Then he knew he would die and join the great army of history. He moved his troops so quickly during his European attacks that as he chased the Nazis back to Germany, his tanks actually outran the supply troops' ability to keep up with him. His gasoline was flown to his position to refuel his army. He was only halted by orders from his commanding officer, who told him, "George, you're going too fast. Wait up." George Patton asked Caesar and Hannibal and Napoleon what to do at various times during the Second World War. Always their advice was to move forward, never fear they would keep him from harm. But they warned him in dreams they could not protect him when there was no battle. Patton succeeded as the most aggressive soldier in the history of the United States, but his war came to an end in Germany in 1945. And a few months later, George Patton died in an automobile accident in Germany in 1945. Perhaps George Patton's ghost will guide some future military leader. It was December of 1878, and the chapel of Our Lady of Light was almost complete. The builders had worked hard to finish the structure before the snows that might cover the ground at Christmas time. It was a beautiful building, and it would be a great gathering spot for the Christmas celebration. There was one problem, however, that seemed to be unsolvable. There was no staircase leading from the main floor to the choir loft. Somehow the blueprint had not left any room for a staircase, and the choir loft was built with no possible entry. The Mother Superior was leaving the convent on that cool morning as a carpenter arrived. He had heard of the problem of the staircase, and he offered to help. The Mother Superior left instructions for the carpenter to be fed and thanked for his kindness, but there was nothing anyone could do. Several carpenters had looked at the building and had decided there is no way to build a staircase to the loft. The plans left no room for the construction. Mother Superior left on her journey to Santo Domingo Pueblo, where an outbreak of cholera required her attention. Manuela showed the carpenter where the choir loft was. Manuela could not speak, but she could understand what people said. As Mother Magdalene was leaving, she saw the carpenter's burro and small wagon with a few simple tools. The other carpenters had larger wagons and more tools, and could not build a staircase. What could one man with so few tools and so little wood possibly do? Mother Magdalene had wanted to have a delightful Christmas celebration for everyone in the area, with a choir singing the favorite carols. When Mother Magdalene arrived at Santo Domingo, she found that the disease that was causing the problem was not cholera, but measles. A measles outbreak in 1878 was a very serious situation and would require all of Mother Magdalene's nursing abilities. Mother Magdalene forgot about the staircase. In a few weeks, the illness subsided and it began to snow. Mother Magdalene knew she must return to the convent right away. Late on Christmas Eve, she arrived at the convent very tired from the long wagon ride. When she arrived, Manuela ran out to greet her and began tugging at the sleeve of her robe. She was taken into the main room of the chapel. There, to her amazement, she saw the staircase. She could not believe her eyes. The staircase was of a spiral design unlike any she had ever seen. The wood was also unlike any wood that grew anywhere near Santa Fe. Mother Magdalene climbed the stairs. She counted the steps, 31, 32, 33. That's one step for each year of our Lord's life, she thought. Who made this beautiful staircase, she asked. Manuela spoke the first word she had ever said. Jose. Jose, that's Spanish for Joseph. The choir was able to sing the carols at the Christmas celebration. To this day, no one has been able to duplicate or even understand the construction of the staircase. No nails were used, only wooden pegs. It is perfectly spliced together and made from a type of wood that is not found near Santa Fe. The carpenter did not accept any pay. And if you want to see the staircase, when you visit Santa Fe, New Mexico, ask for the Chapel of Our Lady of Light. Where are the ghosts? If you are not lucky or unlucky enough to live in a haunted house, there are some places you might try visiting. Places where ghost sightings have been documented. Near Castle Hill, Virginia, is the country home of former President James Monroe. In the main room of the home is a rocking chair. The home is open to the public at different times during the year. Oh, did I mention the house is haunted? I guess I forgot to tell you about the rocking chair. It has a habit of rocking when there's no one in it. Go look for yourself. If you intend to join the Army, West Point, New York, has a ghost that appears in room 4714. Company G4 is housed there. Does the G possibly stand for ghost? The Gray Man of Pawleys Island in South Carolina is a well-known ghost, especially since TV accounts which give him credit for warning of impending hurricanes. He dresses in gray and he looks seaward from the dunes when a hurricane is nearing. The gray man was first seen in 1822, just before a hurricane. He was seen by a resident the day before Hurricane Hazel hit in 1954. He was on the beach, looking at the ocean. The man who saw him asked what he was doing, but the gray man did not answer. He simply disappeared. He disappeared for a while, that is. At 5 a.m. the next morning, the man, William Collins, who had seen him on the beach, was awakened by someone pounding at his door. It was the gray man. The gray man told William Collins to leave the house at once. William Collins turned to switch on the lights, but when he looked back, the porch was empty. The gray man was gone. William Collins and his family got out just in time. The gray man has been seen often since then, just before a hurricane. The city of Bodie in Mono County, California, is the home of a ghostly apparition seen by many. This old mining town, now appropriately enough a ghost town, is a state historic park. The mysterious woman in white appears usually in the late afternoon over one of the gravestones in the cemetery. The grave is of a man who once worked the mine. The ghostly woman floats above the ground and appears to be knitting. Well, you can't have too many sweaters in a chilly coffin. To get there, take Highway 395 north from Bishop, east on 270, and drive 15 miles to Bodie. Historic Rigby is a city about 125 miles northeast of Nashville on State Scenic Highway 52. A celebration there in early August each year is called the annual Rigby Pilgrimage. Some of the Victorian residences are open to visitors. Many are considered to be haunted. Kingston Lyle House has a ghost who snores. Newberry House might be a place to stay if you don't mind sharing your room with a ghost that bends over your bed and wakes you up. The Thomas Hughes Free Public Library is also believed to be haunted. A ghostly carriage has been seen by some and heard by others traveling through historic Rigby. It is pulled by 4 ghost horses who seem to be in a hurry to get somewhere. Marfa, Texas is in the southwest corner of Texas, 60 miles from the Mexican border. Lights were first seen in Marfa in 1883 by a cowboy named Robert Ellison when he was on a cattle drive. Those lights have been seen and photographed by news reporters and others since then. The best time to see them is after a rainstorm or after a cold front has moved through. Some say the lights are the spirits of Apache warriors. Another place to see spirit lights is in the Missouri Ozarks in the village of Hornet near Joplin. The Neosho Spook Light can be seen almost any evening by people who park on Devil's Promenade. The light moves about and occasionally comes near enough to the parked cars, it seems like someone could reach out and touch it. Various accounts say the light is the ghost of an Indian maid who committed suicide years before. Others say it is the ghost of a Civil War soldier who was beheaded by a cannon. So if you want to see the Neosho Spook Light, stay calm and keep your head. One of the ghosts of New York City is seen with some regularity near Broadway and Fulton Street. He occasionally asks ladies if he can photograph their children. Before the ladies can answer, he disappears. He has been identified as Matthew Brady, a photographer who once had a studio at Broadway and Fulton. He is the photographer who once took photographs of soon-to-be President Lincoln. He also was famous for the photographs he took during the Civil War. Somewhere between Hollywood and Burbank is a beautiful 3,000-acre wilderness called Griffith Park. It is the location of the Los Angeles Zoo and the Gene Autry Western Heritage Museum. There's also a merry-go-round, and the park houses the Griffith Planetarium seen in James Dean's movie Rebel Without a Cause. Griffith Park is a pleasant enough place now, but it once was cursed and haunted. It was once a prosperous ranch owned by Don Felez. He died of smallpox in 1863. Some say a phony will was forged and the property was stolen from his 17-year-old niece, Donna Petronella, by Don Antonio. Donna Petronella cursed the new owner and cursed anyone who would own the ranch in the future. She also cursed the attorneys that were involved and promised to make the land barren. Although attorneys and landowners had been cursed before and have been cursed since, Donna Petronella did something that made Don Antonio take notice. She dropped dead at his feet. It was the beginning of death visiting Griffith Park in the strangest of circumstances. The land which had been a successful ranch became barren. When rains did come, it flooded. Livestock could not survive. The ghost of Don Felez appeared often to workers and farm hands who would then quit their jobs in fear. Those who stayed often died mysteriously. The land became the property of Colonel Griffith J. Griffith, who found the curse to be too much to bear. In 1896, he gave the property to the city of Los Angeles to be used by the people. The only stipulation was that there never be a charge to enter the park. The ghost of Don Felez has not been reported in recent years. It appears safe from the curse as long as the city of Los Angeles owns Griffith Park. The city has never been able to turn a profit on anything. Some actors hate to leave this stage we call life. Lon Chaney Sr. was the silent screen star who appeared in the most popular horror films of his time. After his death in 1930, Lon Chaney Sr. was often seen sitting on a bus bench at the intersection of Hollywood and Vine. Another of the monster movie actors who loved the corner of Hollywood and Vine was Bela Lugosi. He walked to Hollywood and Vine every day when he wasn't working. He died in 1956. He was placed in his coffin wearing the black cape that he wore in the movie Dracula. The coffin was loaded into the hearse. There was a rule in 1956 that no funerals could drive down Hollywood Boulevard. It was just too depressing for the tourists. The hearse drove onto Gower Street, and as it crossed Hollywood Boulevard, the driver felt someone take control of the steering wheel. The hearse turned onto Hollywood Boulevard. The driver tried to stop, but someone was holding his legs, and the gas pedal was being pushed down by itself. The hearse, followed by the entire funeral procession, headed west on Hollywood Boulevard. The driver thought he was going to have an accident, but the hearse proceeded down Hollywood Boulevard, weaving in and out of the traffic, and somehow the traffic lights changed to green at just the right time. After passing Bela Lugosi's favorite intersection of Hollywood and Vine, the control of the car was given back to the driver, who then drove back to his assigned street. Some show business stars seem to have been told in advance they would soon be dying. Hank Williams, the country songwriter and singer, has been seen waiting backstage at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville. He's ready to sing once again on the Grand Ole Opry radio program. Hank doesn't know the show moved to a different building many years ago because Hank died on New Year's Day of 1953. Hank's last hit record at the time of his death was called "I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive." Chuck Willis was a popular rock and roll singer. He had a two-sided hit on the charts when he died in 1958. One side was called "I'm Gonna Hang Up My Rock and Roll Shoes," and the other side was called "What Am I Living For?" In Clark Gable's last movie, The Misfits, the actor said, "If a man is afraid of dying, he's not really living." On September 30th of 1955, Donald Turnipseed was driving his Ford Coupe near the intersection of California Highway 41 and Route 466, which is now known as Highway 46, near the town of Chalamet. Donald Turnipseed prepared to make a left turn. He saw that the road was clear, and he turned. He got hit by another car, a Porsche. A passenger in the Porsche named Ralph Wutherich was thrown clear. Donald Turnipseed and Ralph Wutherich survived the collision. The driver of the Porsche was killed. His name was James Dean. He was a movie star who would become the first teen idol of the 1950s. 1 week earlier, on September 23, 1955, James Dean had met with British actor Alec Guinness. He showed Alec Guinness his brand new Porsche. It had just been delivered. James Dean had not yet driven it. Alec Guinness said, "Please never get in that car. If you get in that car, you'll be found dead in it by this time next week." Alec Guinness had no idea why he said those words. But exactly 1 week to the day later, James Dean was dead. A fan magazine reported in 1956 that some of James Dean's fans gathered at the intersection where he was killed exactly 1 year to the minute after the accident. They all heard the accident repeat, and some of them saw James Dean in a phantom Porsche driving on the highway. He was also seen by some of the people who attended the premiere of Giant at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood in October of 1956, 1 year and 1 month after his death, and they say it was the first time they had seen him looking happy. A doctor named Troy McHenry bought some parts for his Porsche in 1956. The parts came from James Dean's wrecked car. The doctor's car with the parts from James Dean's Porsche crashed in October of 1956, killing Dr. McHenry. The Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel across the street from the Chinese Theater is supposed to be haunted by Montgomery Clift's ghost. He was a famous movie star of the 1940s, the 1950s, and the 1960s. He stayed in room 928. When he was a paying guest, he was working on a movie called From Here to Eternity. Well, maybe just a couple of more stories before we give up the ghost. The Queen Mary ocean liner is now a tourist attraction in Long Beach, California. There was a time when it was the biggest and the fastest luxury liner in the world. It outran submarines during World War II. Submarines that wanted desperately to sink the most important of the world's ships, the Queen Mary. It's haunted, you know. There's the young, beautiful lady in the very old-fashioned bathing suit seen occasionally by the swimming pool. There are the voices in the engine room. And there's the ghost dog. The dog can be heard in different parts of the ship at different times. The puppy dog and his owner traveled on the Queen Mary many years ago. The man had a heart attack and he died on the Queen Mary. When the ship's crew checked the room to see what had happened, the dog ran out, and he's been running about from here to there on the Queen Mary with the other ghosts ever since. Isn't it great to know that a ghost's best friend is his ghost dog? A mother received 2 phone calls in Indianapolis, Indiana in October of 1987. The first call told her that a jet plane had just crashed into the hotel where her son worked as a desk clerk. As she prepared to leave the house to see if her son was injured, she heard the telephone ring again. It was her son's voice. He said, "Mom, I'm okay." Later, she would find out her son had been instantly killed in the plane crash, even though he called her a few minutes later. Charles Lindbergh was the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic in 1927. He had been flying for more than 20 hours, and he had little sleep before that, but he is certain that he was not hallucinating when he saw what he called phantoms in his plane. The phantoms were behind him, but they would take turns coming forward and talking to him. He knows he fell asleep once, and one phantom flew the controls while another phantom shook him awake. When he was in his 27th hour of flight, he saw 2 fishing boats on the ocean surface. Lindbergh had not seen anyone in a long time. As he flew lower and circled the boats, no one appeared to be on board. He buzzed the boats, flying within 50 feet, but no one came on deck. He then saw a head looking out a porthole. The face was staring at him. He flew even closer. The face did not appear to have a body. Lindbergh had a desire to stay and solve the mystery, but the phantoms warned him to gain altitude and resume his course, or he would die. He made it to Paris and became a world-famous aviator. Years later, he spoke about the phantoms and said, "Some secret has been opened to me beyond the ordinary consciousness of man." By the way, Charles Lindbergh's airplane was called the Spirit of St. Louis. My brother was riding in a horse-drawn wagon many years ago. Our cousin handled the reins and was taking my brother back to the house where my aunt lived. It was deep in the hills of Kentucky, surrounded by woods that were filled with centuries-old trees. A winding dirt road was the only way to get a wagon in or out. My brother noticed a ball of light in the woods that was pacing the wagon. There were no people in the woods. It wasn't completely dark yet, so if someone was there, they could be seen. It was just a ball of light. My brother told our cousin, "There's a light out there." But my cousin would not turn to look. He didn't speak. It was as if he had seen the light before and wanted nothing to do with it. As they came to the creek and crossed the bridge, the light stopped. It didn't come across the creek. We always felt that the light didn't want to come too close to my aunt's house because her house was haunted, and it wouldn't be polite for one ghost to intrude on another. Well, my time is up, but there'll be other times. Right now, why don't you join me? I think we're just in time for the special down at the Ghost Cafe.